Hello C++ programmers, this is my second video where I'm talking about classes. I've got a class here, height. Every height has two member variables or fields, feet and inches, and then I've got some public functions. The access modifier is public, so anyone, including main, can access these functions and call these functions. I've got set values, get feet, and get inches. And it's pretty common with C++ to have getters and setters, ways to get and set the private fields or the member variables of that class. So in main, I create an instance of height. H is the variable. That's the first time I'm allocating memory for an object of type height. Then I set the values. I call that public function, and based on what I pass in here, 5 and 3, the number of feet and inches are set to 5 and 3. And then in my cout statement, I'm using the getters to get back those values just to verify that the number of feet is 5 and the number of inches is 3. So that all compiles and runs just fine. Notice that the body of my functions is actually inside of the definition of what is a height object. This isn't the most common way to specify the body of a function. These are inline functions where if you have only 1 or 2 lines of code, it makes sense to optimize this. So this is a note to the compiler that it may be more efficient just to copy the body of this function in place of the function calls. A more common way to specify the body of the function, I'm going to actually copy and paste this, outside of the definition of the class, outside of the curly brace and the semicolon, and then I can tie it back into the class by using the class name and the scope resolution operator. And I'm going to do that in front of each of these functions. And then now I just will have the prototype in with the class definition. This is the more common way to do it. In fact, instead of just moving the body of the function in the same file lower down, usually the body of the function is in a whole separate file, and we'll have the class in a header file and the body of the function in a source code file. But for our very second lecture, this is totally fine. So notice that I'm not getting anything underlined in red, that it's perfectly fine to move the body of these functions outside of the definition of what is a height class. And in fact, this is a better practice because you get a bird's eye view of what is the height class without seeing the details of the functions in the middle of looking at what is a height class. So everything works just fine. I want to talk about one other new concept with classes. And first, we have to look at a function that has arguments that you're going to pass in. So when we call the set values, we're going to pass in 2 actual arguments. They're also called actual parameters. And whatever is passed in first, the 5, is going to be copied into the variable f. And in here, we can see f as well. These are the formal parameters. And the way this is written right now, you must have 2 actual arguments in the parentheses, but I'm going to add something called a default parameter. So I'm going to say if somebody doesn't pass in the number of feet, I'm going to default to 5. And if someone doesn't pass in the number of inches, I'm going to default to 2. And notice that nothing's underlined in red, and I can run this and it's going to run just fine. I'm not actually using those defaults because I'm passing in 2 arguments to the function, so I'm going to get the same answer and I'm not making use of the defaults. But now it allows me to have a different function call that doesn't pass in 2 arguments to the function. So I'm going to try calling the function 2 more times just to verify that we could call it with only 1 input argument. Let's say we pass in 6. In that case, it'll default to using 2 as the number of inches. And we can call it with no input arguments. In that case, it should default to 5'2". So I'm going to compile and run that just to verify that it is indeed correct, and I'm using these default parameters, and that opens up a whole new possibility when you're writing functions to have a variable number of arguments. So I've got my 5'3", 6'2", and 5'2".